fair?
You didn't give Texans
How's
the right
that fair?
to vote. You didn't put it up to a ballot proposition.
The question is, but how is it fair in Virginia?
The legislature,
Republicans with one. Would you be okay if we left Democrats with one congressional seat?
You know what I would be okay with? I would be okay with a ban on partisan gerrymandering across the country. And I wish you guys had supported that.
When the president, I mean, so clearly wanted this to happen in Texas, that it did set off this kind of arms race.
Of course it is.
And now it's resulted in
this.
this.
That's my initial point.
Virginia just handed Democrats a potential House majority without winning a single additional race anywhere else in the country. 4 seats. That is all it takes. And Republicans are acting surprised. Subscribe and let us get into it.
Project that Virginia voters have approved a Democratic plan to dramatically redraw the state's congressional map. 92% of the results are in, with just over 51% voting yes on the ballot measure. Now, if this map is enacted, it means Democrats could win 10 out of the state's 11 congressional districts, which would boost the party at large in the fight for control of Congress. Harrington is here to join us. And Harry, obviously, there were a lot of questions of how this would go tonight. Tell us what we're seeing in these numbers so far.
Yeah, I would just say, look, the yes side won. Yes, they are probably going to end up lower than the percentage that Kamala Harris won in terms of the margin. But you know what? A win is a win is a win. And this means a lot for Virginia. And I will just note, just look at this. They are basically going to gerrymander this state rotten. They are basically going to lock Republicans out of power in a state where Donald Trump got 46% of the vote back in 2024. House seats Republicans in Virginia are only going to really end up with 9%. That is quite the imbalance that's going on here, right? Of course, this is part of a larger national picture as well in terms of redistricting. And this, to me, is what is so interesting, right? Oh, we've had all this redistricting, right? It started in Texas. Then it was California. We've done Ohio. We've done North Carolina. We've done Utah. But heading into tonight, pre-Virginia results, the net gain from this mid-decade redistricting was really 0 seats, neither side gaining. But now is where we are right now with the Virginia measure passing. Democrats jump out ahead. They are the ones leading in mid-decade redistricting, leading right now by 4 seats on the strength of that yes vote, however thin that margin actually is.
So, Harry, I mean, obviously, Senator Warren was just talking about 6 months from now, the midterm elections. What could this mean for the fight for who controls Congress here?
Yeah, I mean, if you know anything about the House of Representatives, and you're down in Washington, D.C., so you know a heck of a lot more than I do, I would just say this. The power right now, it's so tight, right? Every vote is so tight in the U.S. House of Representatives. So you just take a look here, and this gives you the math of why this vote was so important. If you talk about the margin of the GOP majority in the House post the 2024 election, it was 2 seats, 2 seats. That's how many seats they could lose on a vote before losing the majority. Now, all of a sudden, we're talking about Democrats gaining 1, 2, 3, 4 seats, 4 seats in Virginia. The simple math here is 4 is greater than 2. Without Democrats needing to pick up any more seats, this would eliminate the Republican majority and instill a Democratic majority because the margins are so tight. This vote in Virginia means so very much, and that's why all that money was spent on it. My goodness gracious.
Yeah, a ton of money. Harry, thank you for doing that math for us.
I know, it's very hard, very hard.
This is why we keep you around.
That's right.
Harrington, thank you for that. For more on this, my political sources are here tonight. Jermichael, what's your assessment of what's happening?
I mean, look, I'm not happy about this. What we're seeing is a gradual destruction of incentives in our country. So what happens when you create an atmosphere and an environment where compromise no longer exists? Yeah, maybe this is good for Democrats today, but is it good for the long run? Probably not. For 4 years, there was an argument from my friends on the other side about democracy falling in darkness. Well, how in the hell is this preserving democracy? And look, I'm not saying that one side over the other doesn't gerrymander. Hell, they all gerrymander. It's just not a good thing at all. The American people don't benefit from this. And as someone who resides in Virginia, where you have, what, 40+% of the state that voted for for the current president, rather, leaving only 1 Republican congressional seat seems to be in force of democracy and protecting the Constitution and the preservation of these great ideals? I would think not.
Well, I mean, what do you say to that? Because that was a question we asked a lot of Democrats once they launched their own redistricting efforts after we saw what happened in Texas. But a lot of them argued to us was, well, if the Republicans are doing it, we're also going to do it.
Yeah, I mean, the real problem here is that Republicans launched a mid-decade redistricting project in Texas. Virginia came up with its results, but Florida is likely to redistrict in the next couple of days. In fact, they held off for the vote. I think, for political reasons, but they are likely to redistrict. So at the end of the day, I think Democrats and Republicans will roughly match out to be equal. We don't know what Florida will do. I think maybe they'll be concerned that redistricting could end up, they could end up losing some of those seats because there could be such a great wave. But I think the truth is that Democrats have supported a nationwide ban on partisan gerrymandering. Republicans have opposed that. This was a part of legislation they tried to pass in the last cycle. Republicans have opposed that. I believe that we should have a nationwide ban on partisan gerrymandering. The real thing that set this all off was Donald Trump called into Texas and asked them, not by anyone voting, but just asked the legislature to change. And in California and Virginia, at least they asked the voters to weigh in. This is very different than what happened in Texas. Voters have said they would like to move forward on this because they recognize the stakes with Trump ending accountability through gerrymandering mid-decade.
Scott, what's your take?
Virginia literally had the fairest maps in the nation. They had a 6-5 map, 6 Democrats, 5 Republicans. In terms of proportional representation, they had the fairest map in the nation that was drawn, by the way, by an independent commission that the voters asked for just a few years ago. Now they will have the least fair maps in the nation. And I'm not surprised that the yes vote won. They had all the money and all the lies. And sometimes in politics, when you got those two things, you can put something over the line. Even something as egregious as this whole thing has driven Spamberger's approval ratings down into the toilet. She lied to the people of Virginia. They had to write a ballot question that was a joke. They drew maps that were a joke. Now you're going to have huge chunks of rural Virginia represented by 5 or 6 Democrats who all live in northern Virginia within about 15 miles of each other. It's a complete joke. Everybody knows it. And there's a reason that all these national Democrats and all their money came into Virginia because, they don't really care about the people of Virginia. They just care about power.
I mean, if we could just put that new map back up, Nira, I want you to respond to that, but if we could just put that new map back up, that's back up that you can see, obviously, what the proposed districts that were on this ballot look like.
Here's the thing. Unlike in Texas and other states, in Texas and Florida, they are not putting this up to the voters, right? Republicans, I don't know, they have a lot of money in their coffers. As far as I can see, the RNC has a lot more money than Democrats.
Who spent
a
more?
lot of them.
But you know what the difference is?
They may not have spent more because you're going to lose. Because the actual issue is, here's what motivated people in Virginia. The fact is that because Donald Trump decided to do a mid-decade redistrict in Texas, people believed that in order to level the playing field, you needed to ensure that Virginia acted.
But you know what the difference is?
Ridiculous is
what's the
one thing just to say, no.
With Texas,
neither one of you said a word about Texas.
Well, that's not true. I actually talked a lot about Texas,
where was Scott
and I wasn't happy about that. But let me just say this: the difference is Democrats have a number of seats still in the state of Texas. Now we can disagree on whether this made sense morally, ethically. That's a fair point. But in Virginia, you're eliminating all but one.
They took 5 seats.
All but one. That's basic math. How is that at all fair? How is that fair?
You didn't give Texans
How's
the right
that fair?
to vote. You didn't put it up to a ballot proposition.
The question is, but how is it fair in Virginia?
The legislature,
Republicans with one. Would you be okay if we left Democrats with 1 congressional seat?
You know what I would be okay with? I would be okay with a ban on partisan gerrymandering across the country. And I wish you guys had supported that.
When the president, so clearly wanted this to happen in Texas, that it did set off this kind of arms race.
Of course it is.
And now it's resulted in
this. That's my initial point. This is not good for the country. Like, I'm a conservative. Hell yes, I want my side to do well. I strongly believe in my principles, and I presume Nira here cares a lot about her side, and she wants to see Democrats do well. But how in the hell is this good for democracy when both sides believe there is no interest in incentivizing on anything? We don't have to compromise. We don't have to figure it out. We don't have to work things out because you know what? We'll have 1 red state, 1 blue state. There will be no purple states. There will be no party in the middle. How does that move things forward when you look at the things that this country is currently struggling with on the economic front, the education front, healthcare? You have China, our greatest adversary, that are moving leaps and bounds ahead, and we can't even govern ourselves appropriately. This should make any person in this country happy about where we are.
I agree. I just think the way to have dealt with this is to have a ban on gerrymandering in any of these states. Mid-decade redistricting is really something has really happened very rarely. North Carolina did it a few years ago, but we should really most people are used to decennial. Most states are used to it, like doing it every decade. We should do it, and we should actually abandon all this. And I wish Republicans had joined the Democrats.
Scott,
to support
if you
that.
were a member of Congress, would you vote to ban gerrymandering?
Well, I actually am rather protective of the states making these decisions.
That's a no.
I don't really have a problem with states making decisions about this. What I have a problem with in this case, look, Texas did what they did. They had a right to do it. Virginia did what they did. What I have a problem with in Virginia is you had a fair map, and you also had an independent commission draw it, and you also had the governor, new governor, tell the people of Virginia during her campaign she wasn't going to do it. So this whole thing was built on lies, and the ballot question, if you read it, was a total joke. You showed the map of the districts. They're a complete joke. And so I think what they've done is they basically disenfranchised
It's like against
90%
democracy.
of the state.
It's against democracy to argue that you're
live in
against the
Virginia.
voters.
I'm a Republican voter in Virginia. I would never do this to Democrats. I don't agree with Democrats on a whole lot of issues.
So you disagree
There's
with
no
it?
way I would do this.
You
How is
disagree
this so
with it on
funny?
a moral front, and you just on a principle front.
Of course.
But politically, I mean, if you're Mike Johnson tonight and you're looking at this, how does that make you feel about November?
I mean, look, you'd be pretty pissed off, but I'll tell you this. Other Republican states are going to do the same thing. And Democrats should not be surprised if there's one congressional district or if there's 0 congressional districts, because that is where we are now.
Yeah. Everett.
Virginia voters just approved a Democratic redistricting plan that could flip 10 out of 11 congressional seats in the state. Harry Enton does the math live on air, and it is brutal in its simplicity. Republicans currently hold the House majority by 2 seats. Virginia alone could deliver Democrats 4 new seats. 4 is greater than 2. Without winning a single additional race anywhere else in the country, the House majority flips. That is not a talking point. That is arithmetic. Now Scott Jennings calls this the least fair map in the nation. And here's where the conversation gets interesting, because Jennings is not entirely wrong about Virginia. The state previously had one of the fairest maps in the country. 6 Democrats, 5 Republicans, drawn by an independent commission. Proportional representation that reflected the actual partisan breakdown of Virginia voters. That map is now gone, and what replaces it gives Republicans 1 seat in a state where Trump got 46% of the vote in 2024. That is a significant imbalance, and intellectually honest people should be able to say so. But here is what Jennings cannot say on that same broadcast without his position collapsing entirely. Texas. Republicans did not wait for a census, did not convene an independent commission, did not put it to voters. Donald Trump called the Texas legislature and asked them to redraw the maps mid-decade to entrench Republican power. They did it. And Scott Jennings was not on television calling that the least fair situation in the nation. He was not calling it a destruction of democracy. He was not expressing concern about rural Texans being locked out of representation. The selective outrage is not a policy position. It is a political reflex. The mid-decade redistricting arms race is the real story here, and the panel almost gets there but keeps pulling back before the full indictment lands. Harry Enton points out that before Virginia, the net gain from all the mid-decade redistricting across Texas, California, Ohio, North Carolina, and Utah was essentially 0. Neither side had gained ground. The maps had roughly cancelled each other out. Virginia tips the balance to Democrats by 4 seats, and now Florida is reportedly about to redistrict, which will tip it back toward Republicans. This is not democracy. This is 2 parties using the machinery of democratic representation to insulate themselves from democratic accountability, and the voters caught in the middle of that machinery have less and less say over who actually represents them with every cycle. Michael Singleton makes the institutionalist argument, and it is the most honest position in the room, even if it is also the most politically inconvenient one. He says this is a gradual destruction of institutions. He says compromise becomes impossible when neither party needs to appeal to the other because the maps guarantee outcomes regardless of performance. He says a state where 40% of voters support one party and that party ends up with 9% of congressional representation is not democracy, even if the process that produced it was technically legal. He's right on every count. And he is right that it is not good for the country regardless of which party benefits in the short term. But here is where the institutionalist argument has to be pushed further than Singleton takes it. The institution of fair representation was not destroyed last night in Virginia. It was destroyed when Tom DeLay redrew Texas districts in 2003 outside the normal redistricting cycle. It was destroyed when Republicans in North Carolina, Ohio, and Georgia drew maps that federal courts repeatedly found unconstitutional, but that remained in place long enough to deliver election results. The institution Singleton is mourning was being hollowed out for 2 decades before Democrats decided to play the same game. Mourning the institution now, without acknowledging who started dismantling it, is incomplete at best and dishonest at worst. The nationwide ban on partisan gerrymandering is where this conversation should have ended and almost does. Multiple panelists agree it is the right solution. Democrats have supported it legislatively. Republicans have blocked it. Jennings says he is protective of states making these decisions, which is another way of saying he supports the system that allows his party to draw maps in Texas without voter approval, while opposing the system that allowed Virginia voters to approve their own maps at the ballot box. The asymmetry in that position is significant, and nobody in the segment pushes on it hard enough. The Virginia governor accusation is the one Jennings keeps returning to. He says Governor Youngkin told voters during his campaign he would not redistrict, and then the state moved forward anyway. If that is accurate, it is a legitimate democratic accountability concern. Politicians should be held to their campaign promises. But that specific concern about one governor's statements does not address the broader structural question of whether the map itself is fair, or whether the process of putting it to voters is more legitimate than the process of having a legislature redraw maps at a president's phone call. Here is the bottom line. Virginia is a symptom, not a cause. The cause is a political system in which the party that controls a state legislature controls, who represents that state in Congress, regardless of how the voters of that state actually lean. That system benefits Republicans in more states than it benefits Democrats, because Republicans control more state legislatures. Democrats in Virginia use the tools available to them to change that dynamic in one state. Republicans will respond in Florida and wherever else they can, and the voters of both states will end up with less actual representation as a result. The only solution that breaks this cycle is the one that neither party in power actually wants to implement. Independent redistricting commissions with legally enforceable standards for proportional representation applied consistently across every state regardless of which party controls the legislature. That is not a radical position. It is what every functioning democracy outside the United States already does. And until America gets there, every Virginia is going to produce another Texas, and every Texas is going to produce another Virginia, and the people who pay the price will be the voters who thought their ballot meant something. What are your thoughts on partisan gerrymandering as a threat to American democracy? Let me know in the comments, and if you enjoyed this video, please give it a like and subscribe to the channel. That stuff really does help us out. Until then, this has been Lucas Stoey, where we cut through the noise so you don't have to. Thanks for watching.